The Watcher in the Woods. Deep in the woods, far from the city, stood an old, decrepit house. Legends surrounded both the house and the forest itself, tales that no one could quite verify, but everyone seemed to know. Locals called it the House of the Watcher. No one knew exactly why, but those who had dared to visit claimed they felt an intense, lingering gaze the moment they crossed the threshold, or even as they simply approached the house. Sergei and his friends had heard the stories for years. They were skeptical. They believed the legends were nothing more than a way to scare off curious teenagers. So, one chilly autumn night, they decided to test their courage and visit the place that everyone in town seemed so afraid of. The group consisted of Sergei, his best friend Mikhail, and two girls, Katya and Anya. They packed flashlights, some snacks, and a camera to record their adventure, hoping to catch something spooky for their YouTube channel. As they walked deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and the usual sounds of crickets and night birds faded away, replaced by an eerie silence. Creepy, isn't it? Mikhail laughed, trying to lighten the mood, but the others didn't respond. The silence of the forest was unnerving, and every step they took seemed to echo louder than it should have. When they finally reached the house, its appearance made even the most fearless among them pause. It was old, much older than they expected, with its wooden walls rotting and the roof caving in. The windows were like dark eyes staring out into the night, and the front door hung slightly ajar, inviting yet ominous. Okay, who's first? Sergei tried to keep his voice steady, but even he felt the heaviness in the air. Katya and Anya exchanged glances, and Mikhail, always the brave one, shrugged. I'll go in. Don't tell me you're all scared. As they entered the house one by one, the air seemed to grow colder. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by the beams of their flashlights. The floor creaked under their weight, and the smell of damp wood and decay filled their noses. The group wandered through the narrow hallway, finding old furniture covered in tattered sheets, faded wallpaper peeling off the walls, and broken picture frames lying on the ground. Look at this, Anya whispered, pointing to an old photograph on the wall. It was a black and white image of a family, a mother, father, and two children. Their faces were stern, almost as if they were annoyed at being photographed. But it was the eyes that unsettled her. They're watching us. Don't be dramatic, Mikhail scoffed. But he, too, noticed the eyes seemed a little too focused. They continued exploring, reaching what must have once been the living room. The fireplace was filled with ashes, and strange markings were scratched into the stone around it. Sergei pulled out his camera, hoping to capture something interesting. This place is definitely creepy, but I don't see anything supernatural. But as he filmed, he noticed something odd through the viewfinder. In the corner of the room, just beyond the edge of his flashlight, was a shadow that didn't match any of them. It was tall, impossibly tall, and seemed to shift slightly as he focused on it. Guys, do you see that? Sergei whispered, his voice barely audible. The others turned their flashlights to where he was pointing, but there was nothing there, only darkness. Stop messing with us, Mikhail muttered, but there was an unease in his voice now. It's not funny. I'm not joking, Sergei insisted, his eyes fixed on the spot, but when he looked back at the camera, the shadow was gone. Anxiety set in. The group felt the same sensation they had heard about, the feeling of being watched. It was a presence, heavy and cold, pressing down on them. The girls exchanged worried glances, and Sergei felt his heartbeat quicken. We should leave, Katya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't like this. But just as they turned to head back to the front door, they heard it, a creaking sound from upstairs, like slow, deliberate footsteps. The floorboards groaned under the weight of something heavy moving above them. The group froze, their breath caught in their throats. Is someone else here? Anya asked, her eyes wide with fear. Sergei motioned for everyone to be quiet. They stood still, listening, as the footsteps continued to echo down the staircase. Let's get out of here, Mikhail said, but the door they had entered through suddenly slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the house, and the air grew colder still. Sergei's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls, and for a split second, they all saw it, a face staring down at them from the top of the stairs. It was pale, with deep-set eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Its mouth was a twisted grimace, and as it watched them, it slowly tilted its head, as if curious. The room seemed to tighten around them, and the shadows grew longer, stretching across the floor like grasping hands. Panic set in. They ran to the door, pulling and yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Sergei pounded on it, yelling for help, but the walls seemed to swallow his voice. The air grew thick, and the sound of whispering filled the room, low and unintelligible. Mikhail shone his flashlight up the staircase, but the face was gone. The footsteps, however, were getting closer, descending the stairs one by one. The group backed into a corner, their flashlights dancing wildly across the walls. The temperature dropped further, and Sergei's breath came out in visible puffs. The whispering grew louder, and the shadows on the walls moved of their own accord, crawling toward them. Sergei felt a hand brush against his back, cold and clammy, and he jerked forward with a gasp. "What is that?" Katya screamed. But before anyone could respond, the flashlight beams flickered out one by one. Darkness swallowed the room, and all they could hear were the footsteps and the whispering, now right next to them. Sergei felt something cold and bony grip his arm, pulling him back. He screamed, and the others tried to pull him free, but the grip was too strong. In the dark, he could feel it, long, sharp fingers digging into his skin, pulling him deeper into the shadows. The whispers grew into a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once. "Run!" he managed to yell before he was pulled away, disappearing into the darkness. The others, panicked, finally managed to burst through the door. They sprinted out into the night, the cold air burning their lungs. Outside, they didn't stop until they were back on the main road, panting and wide-eyed. But when they turned back to look at the house, it was gone. All that remained was a thick mist hanging low over the ground. Sergei was never found. His friends told the police everything, but when authorities searched the forest, they found no trace of the house they described. The only evidence that Sergei had ever been there was the camera they had left behind, lying in the mud. When they played back the footage, they saw the same rooms they had explored, but now, in every frame, there was something watching them. A pale face lurking just out of view, eyes that seemed to follow them wherever they went. And at the end of the video, as Sergei turned the camera toward the stairs, the screen went black, but not before a whisper filled the speakers. "Come back. I'm still watching." For those who dare to wander off the beaten path, be careful. Some places do not wish to be found, and those who find them may never return.